expect the gunfire. They did not expect the icy blast of grape shot spraying toward them like a cloud of flying metal. One moment, the worn-down farmers were marching through the snow, hoping to grab the weapons at the Springfield Armory and change the fate of their homes. The next moment, the state militia unleashed a thunderous shot. 4 men fell instantly. The rest scattered, slipping across ice and frozen mud, running for their lives as smoke drifted over them like a final warning. How did it come to this? How did the same people who fought side by side for freedom end up on opposite sides of cannons? How did the country that had just escaped from a mighty empire come so close to collapsing under the weight of its own debts and fears? To answer that, you have to picture the strange, messy world left behind after the Revolutionary War. The war was won, but the victory was like a firework, bright for a moment, then gone, leaving darkness. The new United States was flat broke. Not tight on money broke, more like, if this were a wallet, moths would fly out broke. The national government, under the Articles of Confederation, could not collect taxes at all. Imagine trying to run a household where no one is allowed to earn any money. Bills pile up, promises go unpaid, and arguments break out fast. Every state acted like its own separate country, suspicious of the others. And in Massachusetts, the problem was worse than anywhere else. The state owed huge amounts of money from the war, so it raised taxes, not small taxes, big, heavy taxes that hit the people with the least cash: farmers. Most of these farmers lived in western Massachusetts. They worked long days, sunup to sundown. They were not lazy. They were not careless. They were simply living in a new economy they barely understood. Massachusetts demanded taxes in hard money, the shiny metal kind, not in grain or livestock. To a farmer, that was like asking someone who gets paid in apples to pay bills in diamonds. Nearly impossible. Courthouses filled up quickly, foreclosure after foreclosure, families losing their homes, debtors' prisons swelling with people who had nowhere else to go. The very people who fed the state were being crushed by it. And this is where Daniel Shays enters the story. Daniel Shays was not a man who dreamed of leading a rebellion. He was a quiet farm boy, someone who wanted a simple life. When the war broke out, he fought bravely. He risked his life for a country he believed in, and he came home expecting that country to stand with him. Instead, he came home to unpaid wages, mountains of taxes, and court papers threatening to take his land. It felt like betrayal, like finishing the hardest job of your life, and your boss says, "Thanks, but now you owe us." It was a punch to the chest. There is one detail that shows just how hard things were. Daniel Shays was so poor that he had to sell the ceremonial sword the government gave him for his service in the war. A sword meant to honor him became something he pawned just to keep food on the table. That kind of moment does not leave a man unchanged. It grips you tight and does not let go. Farmers across the region felt the same desperation. They met in barns, in taverns, and in fields, sharing stories that sounded more like warnings. They were all in the same sinking boat, and the water was rising. They started calling themselves regulators, which sounds complicated, but the idea behind the word was simple. If the courts were destroying their lives, then the courts needed to stop. So they marched to courthouses and blocked them. They stood shoulder to shoulder, not with malice, but with fear. If the court could not open, then no one could lose their farm that day. The judges saw those crowds and felt the tension. One judge had to sneak out the back while the crowd surrounded the front. The message was loud, even without shouting. We cannot pay what we do not have. To lawmakers in Boston, though, this looked like chaos. It looked like a spark that could become a wildfire and burn the entire state down. They saw danger where the farmers saw survival. The state panicked. But it had a problem. Massachusetts was too broke to raise an army to stop the rebellion, so wealthy merchants stepped in and paid for a private militia. Imagine being so afraid of your own neighbors that the rich have to hire an army to protect the state from its own people. It created a split that cut deep. The wealthy on one side, the struggling on the other. By late 1786, Daniel Shays had become one of the key leaders, not because he craved power, but because people trusted him. He knew their pain. He felt it in his bones. When the farmers marched behind banners calling for fairness and representation, Shays walked with them. Their slogans, like equality before the law and no taxation without representation, were the same ones used in the Revolution. And that unsettled everyone in power. The echoes were too familiar, too close. As the winter of 1787 approached, the situation grew heavier. The protests turned into something bigger. Rumors spread. Whispers of taking weapons to defend themselves. Whispers of marching on state buildings. Whispers that the farmers would not step aside quietly. Then came the plan that would lead to the moment of disaster. The rebels believed that if they could seize the weapons stored at the Springfield Armory, they could protect themselves and force the state to negotiate. They imagined a world where the state would hear their voices at last. The morning they marched toward the armory was bitterly cold. Their breath turned to frost as they walked. Their clothes were worn, their boots thin. But their determination kept them moving. They believed the armory was within reach. Hope felt close enough to touch. What they did not know was that the militia, funded by wealthy merchants, was already waiting. Soldiers stood ready, cannons prepared. When the farmers came into view, the militia gave them a chance to turn back. But turning back meant losing everything. And so they kept moving forward. The militia fired. The grape shot ripped through the group like a metal storm. 4 men dropped immediately. Others screamed. Some ran. Some froze. Daniel Shays watched the dream of fairness he had fought for dissolve into panic and gunsmoke. The rebellion was not defeated in a dramatic battle. It was crushed in a few terrible seconds. Shays fled to Vermont. Many rebels went into hiding. And although Shays would later be pardoned, the scars of that day never truly faded for the communities involved. But even as the rebellion collapsed on the ground, its consequences spread across the entire country. Leaders like George Washington, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton watched the news with rising fear. If a few thousand desperate farmers could shake the country this badly, what would happen next time? And the time after that? The national government was too weak. That much was clear. It could not raise an army. It could not collect taxes. It could barely keep the states from arguing with each other. Shays Rebellion became the warning bell nobody could ignore. And that warning led directly to something enormous. The convention, where leaders would gather to create a stronger national government. The convention that would lead to the United States Constitution. The rebellion that started with debt, fear, and broken promises would become a turning point that reshaped the future of an entire nation. But how did fear, inside that cold Massachusetts winter, turn into the document that would define American power for centuries? And why did the farmers' struggle echo through the minds of the men who drafted the Constitution? Those questions lie just ahead. The real impact of Shays' Rebellion was only beginning.